Recent figures show that boys continue to fall behind girls in school. The process starts early as second grade. An otherwise bright boy hits a wall and becomes discouraged, and by puberty, he's pretty much resigned to being a slacker, even with incentives to do better or punishment hanging over his head when he doesn't. Our guest today has co-authored a book that speaks to parents to help them work with sons to turn struggling boys around. Cynthia Gill is herself a mother, a licensed marriage and family therapist. Her experience includes years of teaching, counseling, and mentoring. She and Pam Withers are the authors of Jumpstarting Boys, Help Your Reluctant Learner Find Success in School and Life. And we're happy to welcome Cynthia Gill to Chief for Yourself. Thanks again for stopping by. I want to ask you, first of all, this book addresses parents of boys. Now, we say boys. What age group are we talking about?
Well, our book is especially targeted for parents of boys ages 7 to 17. But a person with a kid younger than that would certainly also benefit from reading it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When we look out over the landscape today, we see a world that's filled with high-tech gadgets, all kinds of systems that keep evolving at breakneck speed, and it would seem like a fertile ground for young, active boys. You can imagine them itching to take their own place in this world, but something happens to a lot of boys on the way to this destiny, if you will. They trip over their learning difficulties, especially with reading. So talk about how boys get into the slow lane and how they just seem to stay there.
Well, I think that even when a boy enters school, it's pretty well known that he's probably 18 months behind the girls in certainly in reading and being able to write. Sitting still and listening and doing things neatly and quietly are just not things that most 5- and 6-year-old boys do easily. So I think already they have a disadvantage from the get-go in our school system. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of painting a dismal picture here. But by the time, what happens so many times to these boys is they will decide, by the time, even in their very young elementary years, that they can't do as well as girls, so why even try? And sometimes the teachers and the parents make mistakes. For example, not letting them fidget, or making them read books that they aren't interested in because they're more female-oriented. And those are a couple of things right off the bat. But the most important factor, I think, is the discouragement factor, where they just plain feel discouraged.
You mentioned. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that a couple of things that we can do to do that is, number one, to rectify that. Number one is to recognize that they are at a disadvantage and allow them to have more kinesthetic type experiences, more moving about, tolerate more activity, find more opportunities for them to, run and play and act out what they're reading and thinking and so on, instead of expecting them to sit and, not move for a long period of time. I think that more male influence would be very helpful. Around 4th grade, we talk quite a bit in the book about our 4th grade slump. Around 4th grade, the gap widens between the kids as far as performance, partly because by then the girls are pretty good. There's more expected of them in the area of reading and writing. So the girls are outperforming the boys even more, and a lot of boys just hit a wall and say to themselves, well, what's the use? So there's some things that parents can do to make a difference with that, which is, again, our book is much more positive than what I'm saying right now. I'm giving you kind of a doom and gloom picture here, but our book is full of very positive and encouraging tips for parents.
We talk about boys and their tendency to fidget. How much fidgeting can be tolerated in a classroom? How far do you go with that?
Well, I think that gradually teachers are learning that it is good for them to fidget. I've even heard of teachers giving them stress balls more lately than maybe 10 years ago, But I don't think I taught for 25 years, and I don't think it's out of the question to stop a class for a little while and plan another activity. after a certain length of time, or have the boys go do an activity, have the whole class do an activity and allow the boys some movement. It's pretty difficult to quantify how much fidgeting is possible, but it definitely needs to be more than the average person has now.
Mm-hmm. In the book, you call them reluctant readers. What is it about the printed word that gives boys cause to hesitate?
Well, their brain development is different. From the time they're little, their brain there's not as much activity there that allows them to process words. And so they sense already that they can't process them as well as girls do. And so they do need extra encouragement in that. Sometimes if they get compared to the girls, or they do compare themselves to the girls, then they get discouraged as well. I think the role model factor is also important. I mean, the vast majority of teachers in elementary school are female, and the vast majority of writers of books that the little kids read are females as well, with themes that don't appeal always to boys. And there needs to be more male protagonists and male examples of reading and talking about books. Like if dads can do it, that's ideal. And a lot of dads are stepping up to the plate more and more, or uncles, or big brothers, or mentors, or volunteers. So we have some cool stories in our book. Like there's one school where they recognize the need for male role models to encourage their boys. So they had all the staff agree that once a week a boy would go with handcuffs and handcuff some male staff member to come and read to the class. Mm-hmm. And it could be the janitor or it could be the principal. But those kids saw, males interacting with them about books, and coaches who are willing to do this. You can find a coach tremendously influential in the kid's life. If you can talk to him about a book or something like that, have him see him reading, that does wonders.
I guess a program like a Big Brother program would also help. It wouldn't hurt for a Big Brother, let's say, to undertake activities that would aim a boy in that direction.
Yes, there's quite a bit of research on how boys with mentors like that who connect with a mentor are much less at risk for the kind of behaviors that are destructive, in their later teen years.
Mm-hmm. How is the teaching community reacting? You mentioned that women teachers need to be more sensitive to these things. Are you getting a lot of cooperation in that area, or do you see people saying, we shouldn't discriminate that way, or hold somebody else back by paying attention to these boys? How are they reacting?
Well, here's an example. If a teacher assigns the kids to write a story, and the boy writes one with lots of adventure in it, and maybe some violence and some, excitement, and there's guns in there and all kinds of things, and the girl writes a nice, sweet one about two little girls who are playing, and there's a lot of talking and so on, and the female teacher looks at the stories and gives the boy one his back and says, you know what, there's too much violence in this. This really isn't good for us to write stories about war. Can you go and write about something more appropriate? Mm-hmm. That boy is going to be devastated. And you can bet he is not, even if he turns in something that she accepts, he is going to have lost his enthusiasm and his positive view of writing. Mm-hmm. So teachers need to expand their tolerance for things like, excitement, war stories, adventure stories, the humor, even toilet humor and things like that. Mm-hmm. Graphic novels, we talk about books with pictures in them that boys, it appeals to the boy's brain much more so, especially in younger ages. So I think teachers just need to be aware of their inadvertent biases. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not faulting teachers in any way as far as being, purposely malicious or anything like that. I think it's a lack of knowledge, Mm-hmm. So that's one reason we wrote the book, is to encourage, parents to encourage teachers even on this.
We see. That makes plenty of sense. We see issues with boys diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, brain injuries, and such. But I'm wondering if your research is also showing that boys are reacting, or how much they are reacting to an unhappy home life as a way of this playing out. Do you see a lot of that too?
Yeah, I see a lot of that in my practice. It just breaks my heart. In fact, that's one reason I left teaching, to go into family therapy, because I saw the tremendous devastation that happens, you know, in when homes are troubled. The interesting thing is there are ways for parents to learn how to handle their difficulties in a more mature manner. And for boys growing up without a father in the home, there are other mentors available for these boys, you know, which I think are really important. A lot of times, too, I see kids getting diagnosed with ADHD when I really think they have anxiety. And anxiety comes from a struggle in the home, many times. And many times parents have anxiety. I mean, it's rampant in our culture. We all, let's face it, we all struggle with it to some extent.
Sure.
So, to encourage boys, and sometimes I'll say, well, the whole family needs to be involved in helping, you know, these people get better. Because sometimes the parent will bring the kid to me and say, I want you to fix my kid. They're not saying it in that many words, but that's their attitude, you know. Mm-hmm. So I'm always encouraging the whole family to be involved. You know, it's a family project. We're all going to work on our anger control and our anxiety control, and learning how to do deep breathing and relaxing together, and doing fun things together, and using connecting and nurturing activities, eye contact, and those types of things. Those help families to connect and can help families become healthier.
Now, when you look at these boys having reading problems, are you also seeing problems in areas that are traditionally strong for boys, like science and math?
You know, we have a whole chapter on science and math. They had asked us to add one, so we did. Right now, it seems that boys are still higher in science, but boys and girls are even in math, because there's been a concerted effort to raise the ability to reaching out to the girls in math. So we're looking at, at a fairly evenness between the two genders in math. Unfortunately, though, we still are, our whole country is behind in math and science overall in the world. So we are looking at a need to continue to improve math and science as well.
Mm-hmm. Kids spend a lot of time.
And the other thing.
Oh, go ahead.
What? If the boys can't read very well, though, in later years, they are not going to continue to excel. They're not going to continue to do well in science, because if that doesn't know how to read to do well in science in later years.
Makes sense.
In school.
Yeah. Kids spend a lot of time online, of course, for play or possibly for schoolwork. Is there a way to bring the internet into this as one form to help boys?
Yeah, we talk about how reading some of those wikis and some of those, little blogs or articles or things like that, that we need to count that as reading and encourage the kids, encourage the teachers and the kids that this is indeed reading for them, and ask them to tell us about them. One of the most powerful things a parent can do is to engage in conversation with their son about what they've read on the internet that day. Mm-hmm. Or go ahead and go look it up and then tell them about it. There needs to be more active engagement. And then, yes, we can definitely use the internet. I also think that it's a good idea to engage with the children in talking about some of the dangers of the internet, or some of the things on the internet that just aren't true, that are presented as fact. But the kids aren't going to figure this out on their own if they're not engaged with an active adult who's taking the time to talk with them about it.
Kids spend a lot of time playing games, and I hear and see different studies about how those games are affecting kids. Some say, it's just a terrible waste of mind and brain power, and others are saying, well, there are skills that come into effect there, and maybe are helping kids. How do you feel about video games and all the time that kids spend playing?
Well, I'd like to see less time playing video games I think that the studies, some of those video games really do increase the kids' aggression and obesity and impulsivity. Those are things that concern us very much because they don't, and they also decrease their attention span, a lot of them. So I'm not a real fan of the average video game for very long. I think that they need to, that there's a lot of other things they could do. For example, if they could spend time, I mean, in the olden days, the kids went fishing. Let's say they go fishing with their grandpa. Now, that is a good activity. The kid learns patience. They interact with their grandparents. They're with nature. That to me is a lot more productive than sitting and shooting at people and killing people on the screen for hours at a time. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a whole bunch of stuff in there on limiting screen time, how to help the parents to limit that without harming their relationship with the kid. We're not trying to have them act like Nancy Police saying, no more, and then no more screen time, and then that's it. But no, the idea is to promote other activities to replace the screen time, the excessive screen time.
Mm-hmm.
That works a lot better for a relationship with a kid than just to, lay down limits without a relationship with them, or a good relationship.
One of the things you emphasize in the book is the one-on-one interaction during reading time. To some parents who are really busy, they may say, well, you just take your books and you read. But you have a different way of looking at that with parents getting involved in this. What is that one-to-one interaction like?
Well, 15 minutes a day of reading with him or to him can triple their reading improvement. I mean, it's phenomenal. What it does is it does something to the boy's emotional part of his brain. The limbic system becomes much more activated, he's much more connected with himself and with the person, and thus he has a more positive experience with reading. It's not another passive. You can read by yourself, but it's more passive. Mm-hmm. If you're reading with someone else, it's more active and more relational, which they really need. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest things we have in the book, too, is about reading buddies. One of the greatest gifts. Reading buddies can drastically increase a child's perception of himself, his reading skills. It could be a reading buddy where you pair let's say you have a weak reader. Let's say you have a fifth grader who's kind of a weak reader. So you pair him with a third grader who's a weak reader, and suddenly the fifth grader sees, instead of seeing himself as a loser, now he sees this kid looking up to him because he's good mm-hmm. compared to that third grader. That changes his perception of himself. So reading buddies is a great way to help them to have a positive experience with reading, and to, and with parents, of course, like I said, it helps them in the relational aspect, which really does make a big difference in their overall outlook on themselves and on life.
I know that in society now there's a lot of divided opinion over how important esteem or training a child's in esteem is for a child. And yet it seems, as I read the book, that a child's esteem, a boy's esteem, is really important in taking this all to heart and to using it to his advantage. What can you say about esteem or giving boys good, strong self-esteem that won't sound as though we're coddling him?
Mm-hmm. Now, that's a good question. I appreciate your asking that, because I think there's a widespread misunderstanding of self-esteem. Mm-hmm. We have the two kinds of self-esteem. I call it the true self-esteem and the false self-esteem. Let's do the false one first. The false one is where the kid gets kind of this arrogant view. It's almost, it feeds a narcissistic idea of, oh, you're so special. No matter what you do, you are just amazing, and the kid does one little thing right, and the parent goes, wow, thank you so much for doing that. So the expectations are really low. And the kid does not learn a lot of self-discipline, because the parent isn't really requiring it, but it's more of a flattery. And the kid, I can figure that out, that it's more of an empty flattery than it is a real, genuine self-esteem. But I see that a lot with kids. And then the true kind of self-esteem is where you're teaching that kid self-discipline, and you have reasonable expectations that you expect that you convey to them. You have consequences, but you don't give them consequences with anger and harshness. It's more with empathy and working with them so they can learn self-discipline. You teach them things like perseverance and serving other people, like community service and things like that, instead of the "I'm great, I'm awesome" type of view.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a widespread misunderstanding. There's a myth out there of self-esteem that you have to just, bow down to them and give them everything they want. It gives them too much power, and it really does not help them when they have the false self-esteem.
Another thing the culture hammers away at is how important it is to get a college education, and yet some of our most important and successful characters and colorful characters dropped out of school. People like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg. Is reading really all that important, I guess, in this sense? It's obvious that with a good idea and lots of persistence, you can do quite well for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one of our premises of the book is that reading is very important, and that we want boys to go to college and succeed in college if they possibly can. Now, I agree with you that there are things more important than college, just plain old college success in life. And that certainly is the character traits, like the perseverance, the creativity, the willingness to think outside the box and organize things like that some of our successful people have. And those are character traits, but those don't come when the kids are real discouraged. Kids need to be encouraged, not discouraged, in order to have those qualities. I think a college, if the kids can go to college, and I'm also in favor of a gap year if they're not ready for college, which way too many 18-year-olds are not these days. But I think college education can have the effect of teaching them self-discipline, which is vital to get anything done.
Yeah, a gap year. I like that term. Yeah, it doesn't hurt to wait a little bit, right? Because kids don't always know what they want to do. They get into school, they waste a lot of time. Maybe they get discouraged.
Yeah. It's really too bad to see a lot of the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds floundering in college.
Mm-hmm.
Not really appreciating the privilege they have of being there because they're emotionally too immature to get it. So I'd rather see them out learning some perseverance and hard work, the old-fashioned type things,
right,
and then go to college when they can,
Yeah.
So
teachers could read your book and maybe feel that they're taking a lot of heat. Do you get challenged by teachers and teacher groups? Do they come up to you and say, hey, you're being kind of rough on us?
Well, our book just came out, at the end of June, so we haven't had a lot of feedback from anybody yet, really. A few, I guess, a few people, but no, we have not had teachers complain to us that we are being hard on them, and we're not, and we really are. I don't think we are hard on teachers. I mean, I've been a teacher for 30 years before I changed careers, so I am definitely not going to criticize teachers. Instead, we have ways that parents and teachers can work together. There's a whole section on do's and don'ts for parents when you're working with the teacher, and some suggestions for teachers that they can do, right in the classroom to help both boys. So I don't really think our book is in any way blaming or targeting teachers at all.
Mm-hmm.
Our projected audience, though, really is the parents, because so many parents are desperate for understanding of what they can do. There's no one more motivated to help their kids than the parent, usually.
Well, if you could speak to educators in the system, are there specific changes or favorite changes that you can think of that you'd like to see put into effect in short order that would change the way boys react to reading? What in particular would you stress?
Yeah, I think I would say things like read aloud in class more, less silent reading, let them have more breaks, physically move around, let the kids have more breaks. Don't take recess away. let the kids have the option to dramatize their reading and writing, act them out, draw for them, and so on. Develop a higher tolerance for squirming, talking. Set up more buddy projects such as reading or writing with partner, even though this is a little more work for the teacher. Stock the school library with more boy-friendly books. Give the boys a greater choice in book selection. Appeal to their competition whenever possible. Kids need to see male role models come in and speak to them about reading and talk about books. The average teacher needs to engage with, really people who go active in this area. There's a couple of organizations out there. One's called Drop Everything and Read. You can just drop everythingandread.com. And there's another one called Watchdogs, DOGS, Dads of Great Students. I think a school could start a boys' reading club, a boys' writing club, where they girls aren't allowed, but the boys girls will too if they want. But that way the boys can write, can do their own stuff,
Sure.
and they won't feel overwhelmed because the girls do it better at that stage.
Yeah.
And above all, I'd like to see more and more teachers use ways to correct boys that are less shaming, less humiliating, more encouraging. There are materials out there to teach them on that, and I think that makes a big difference too.
Great ideas, great ideas. And they're not discriminatory. When you have a group that has a problem the way these boys do, it's not slighting one and favoring the other, is it?
No, not at all. Our goal is to, increase the conversation about how to help boys, but it in no way denigrates all the wonderful work going on to help girls. In fact, when boys do better, girls do better too. Girls benefit when boys do better.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the simple thing of the classroom, there won't be as many boys being so disruptive because of being angry and discouraged. If the teachers can learn how to deal with boys better, the girls are going to benefit too. That's way down in elementary school, and in the big picture, later on. Right now, we have probably 60% of the college folks that are enrolled are women, and 40% are men, and the gap is widening. So if you look down the road a ways, you have more women going to get PhDs and master's degrees and so on, fewer men. Now, that doesn't help women either, because women don't like to marry down. Marriages don't always work as well when you have a woman with a master's degree or a PhD and a man who barely graduated from high school. That many times provides an unstable, a less stable marriage. So, we're looking at wanting to help women just as much as men by helping the guys.
Sure. One last question, we'll let you go here. A great gift that a parent can give a child is taking care of the parent's own emotional health. It seems this could be a tougher task than dealing with the most spirited boys. How do you bring this subject up to a parent who's probably hearing it for the first time?
Well, I do bring it up, and sometimes the parents are open enough to consider it, and sometimes they're not. Talks about that in that very section there. I usually bring it up kind of almost jokingly. I'll say, well, all of us were probably raised in ways that might not be so, we're probably parenting in ways that might not be always so useful. Maybe how our parents parented us. It might not be so helpful. So I always think that we can all improve in parenting skills, And sometimes the parent, and I'll kind of laugh, and sometimes they'll laugh with me, So I said, and then I'll tell the kid, I'll say, I'm real hard on the parents. If I got the family in there, I'll say to the kid, right in front of the kid, I'll say, I'm real hard on the parents. I give them homework and stuff. And the kid will kind of laugh, because he's usually feeling like he's the bad guy and he's terrible, and the parents have brought him in because he's this problem. So so sometimes the parents will buy in to that, and then they will address their own struggles, and sometimes they